Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to NextRev's Power Hour. My name is Jason Bland. I'm an application engineer for NextRev, and I'll be conducting today's Power Hour on controlling and managing external references with Creo Parametric 3.0. For some of you who haven't seen Creo 3.0, this will be a chance for you to see it for the first time. I'll cover some of the more generic changes, updates to the software, and try to keep it specific to external references, and maybe just cover some of the interface changes that have happened, and we'll leave the other modules for other Power Hour dates. Okay, let's talk about first who NextRev is, who I am. NextRev is located in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, Santa Clara to be specific. We are the largest value-added reseller on the West Coast for PTC products, and we have a lot of in-house experience, about 25 years of product experience around training, mentoring, consulting around those products. If you have any curiosities about what kind of training we're offering, go to nextrev.com/training. We're conducting training on just about a weekly basis. Anything from intro to update courses on Creo, simulate any of the modules that you might find, sheet metal, surfacing, any of those other modules, we train pretty regularly on those. Okay, about me, I've been working in the PTC ecosystem now for about 20 years. I am a certified trainer consultant and been with NextRev for about 5. I have a lot of experience in aerospace, PTC, Lawrence Livermore Labs, and pretty much do everything around those products, consulting, training, and mentoring. Okay, so where are we now with our Power Hours? We are second to last on this list. We're almost done with our, I would call it, say, a kind of a Creo 3 series, if you will. Some of the more useful and off the beaten path sort of functionalities that they placed in the software. And the controlling and managing of external references has been updated with some really nice features. I'd say one in particular is going to really be huge for people who like to share geometry or borrow sort of sketch geometry from part to part at the assembly level, which happens a lot and can create a lot of issues. Our last Power Hour is going to be importing external data into Windchill. Okay. So we're going to be talking about several things here. There's functionality kind of all over the place with regards to seeing how we update and reference geometry and how we can change those references. So we're going to be talking about editing references without going into edit definition on a feature. So that's a lot of times what we do is we edit definition on a sketch or an extrude, and we change the references within that interface. And of course that's okay to do that, but you know, we could always use a faster way to do things like that. So that's one of the things I'll be showing. And when you do that, you are basically editing the features to change the parent of that particular feature, so that maybe you've decided that you want it to be tied to another type of feature and it be the parent. We'll also be talking about replacing references of downstream features. So if I have a sketch that has 10 features built off of it, I can replace that sketch with another sketch, and it will actually replace all of the references downstream into those 10 features. So it's kind of reverse of doing the edit references. You're actually replacing the references from one feature, or however many features it might be. Another thing that's been placed in the software is what's called update control, and this allows us to use several ways of updating features. So if we're using copy geoms, for instance, using advanced assembly extension, which is a very powerful feature for sharing geometry from one part to the other, typically from a skeleton part down into subcomponents, we now have some options where we can basically we can keep it default where it automatically updates the child geometry when we make changes in the parent geometry, the skeleton, or we can have it set up so that it will be more of a manual update, and we can decide whether or not we want to have that change flow through to the lower level components. We can have a notification as well, and we can actually investigate the changes before we allow those changes to come through. We can see and isolate and view the change in the geometry versus the old geometry and decide, okay, this is a change that I want to update, or maybe I want to just break the reference away from the copy geom altogether, and that's the node dependency option you see there in the image, to break that reference completely. Now we can do that either beforehand as we're referencing the geometry, or we can do it you know, after we've decided, hey, you know, this copy geom's been kind of ended its usefulness to me, and I'm going to now break it and make this geometry independent. So we can break those external references automatically or manually, and we can have copy geoms either be a manual or automatic update. And we have several ways that we can control the backup of references. So let's say I go into a sketch and I start referencing some geometry in another part at the assembly level. I've activated that part at the assembly level to reference some other geometry. I'm creating an external reference at that point. Now that can work, and a lot of times it does, but it can also cause issues later where you could create a circular reference for yourself. And let's talk about that now. Let's talk about some of the challenges that can come out of this. So one thing would be if I'm maybe I accidentally externally reference some feature, and as I change one part, the geometry on one part, this other part's geometry is changing, and I have no idea why that might be. So, you know, you can create a lot of issues for yourself by external referencing at the assembly level. It's a very powerful way to create geometry, but it also requires some sort of, you know, discipline as far as how you do it and what you reference. One of the other things it can do is create circular references, meaning that if I assemble to one part and then take that parent part and reference to the child part of some geometry, well, now I've created a cross-reference or a circular reference between those two, and these can be as simple as a couple of components, or they can be very complicated circular references that can cause very extended, long regeneration times. Typically, with a circular reference, the model tree needs to regenerate more than once, and that can extend a large assembly by quite a bit. So you want to reduce the amount of circular references and only externally reference with copy geoms if necessary. And if you want to externally reference with a sketch to some other geometry, that is definitely more of an option here in Creo 3.0 now, because we have the option to reference that geometry and then break that reference automatically immediately after we've referenced the geometry, instead of having to go through and manually remember to go do it first and then go manually do it later. One of the things that we see a lot of is if you've got external references from one part to another at the assembly level, and you go to do a copy or save as in Windchill, for instance, in a PDM tool, because those parts are more or less interlocked to each other, one kind of depends on the other depends on it, in the case of a circular reference, well, PDM tools want you to copy both. Maybe you want to copy just one part when you copy the assembly and give it a new name, but the other one needs to come along for the ride as well. So you end up with an issue where you're having to copy parts you really don't want to, or fix references you should. So a couple of really big headaches there. And then just changing references, one of the long-standing issues with that was that you had to go and edit definition edit references is now a viable option. It has always been a command in the right mouse menu, but it's always used the older interface, and now we're going to be showing you how you can use that to your advantage. So again, easily breaking references is a benefit. We can have it either automatically do it, or we can manually do it later. We can quickly change references. Basically, if we have a feature, the design intent changed, and we want to re-reference it to some other geometry, that's easy to do. And then we can also get notifications on updated geometry like copy geoms. Here's some of the interface. You're going to see some of the config options. We have a couple of new sections in the options area. I'm going to touch on these. One of them is the update control area. And one of the things you can do, if you're using Layout, which is another application, it's kind of a 2D application where you can create 3D geometry. We can have it linked to our models, and we can control the updates there. But typically what we're going to be doing is using the copy feature reference update. That one is one where you're actually referencing geometry for a sketch, for instance, or maybe for the depth of an extrude, you click on a surface that's external to the part. That's a copied feature reference. Now we can have that feature reference either update manually and or automatically, either one, which is kind of the default, or we can actually say, basically tell it no reference at all and break that reference completely. So we're going to be touching on that. Another thing that's been added to Creo 3.0 is a notification that maybe you have a missing model, regeneration has failed. The statusing within the model tree has been greatly improved. One of the issues was that if you had a failed model and it was way down, kind of buried down into lower level assemblies, you didn't really see it carried up to the top level. You had to kind of dig down and to find it, or go into your regeneration status light to find it. Now it kind of carries up with a little icon next to the top level assembly. You kind of dig down into it from there and investigate it. Just to be clear on some of the functionality I'm going to be showing today, some of it's coming from Advanced Assembly Extension, and some of it's coming from Design Exploration Extension. You can get by just fine with AAX on doing the manual and automatic updates. You don't necessarily need the notification, although it's nice. You can also break, the breaking of dependencies, which I think is really the huge one in this whole list. It comes with both. So if you have AAX, you then have the ability to break references either after the fact or on the fly. And you can also decide when and where you want to have updates happen. Let's say you copy some surface from your skeleton into a part. You can actually just decide, okay, I want it to automatically update, which is the default, or I want to decide when it gets updated. Okay, let's go ahead and jump into the software. I want to show you first a couple of a few things here in the interface. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about that. One of the things that you'll notice right off the bat when you jump into Creo is, some of the icons, they've kind of polished up the interface a bit. Right mousing menus, you get icons for some of the most commonly used commands. They're sort of iconifying all of these various commands. Right mouse menus can be customized under options and shortcut menus. So you can actually add and remove commands, change the order of the commands so that when you come into a right mouse button, maybe you want to remove some of the commands that you don't use that much, for instance. You can now customize those commands. Another thing is when you're creating a feature, let me just back up a second here. When you're creating some sort of feature within so you'll notice all of the options tabs here, and this is a pretty common scenario in any feature that you're creating in Creo. So I'm creating a hole here at the assembly level, which I don't really recommend you do. But with these options panels, you can actually drag and tear these off now. So you can see I have the placement option kind of pulled off here. Let's just, with the shape one, we'll do that one as well. So anytime you click down on these, it will actually activate and actually remembers where you tear these options off to. So next time I come into the whole feature, I should see my placement option there, my shape option there. So just so you know, I mean, so I guess the big thing was that there were some complaints over things like this where you see the options panels kind of covering the model tree. And that's one of the reasons why they've placed this in here, so that you can actually further customize your interface. One other, few more things here. Getting views. If you want to go normal to a surface, you can actually do this in one pick now. So reorient has always been there. You pick a plane to go normal to, or surface to go normal to, and then a reference plane. But this view normal is actually, you just click down on one surface, so this surface here, and it will take me normal to that surface. It doesn't really matter about the reference plane in that case, but I can always use a reorient. So you got a view normal command now. The other thing too is when you're saving, you'll see that this assembly's been saved after I just saved it there. I'm no longer getting this weird sort of confirmation dialog box that really didn't do much. You get it initially to tell you where to save the assembly or part if it's new, but after that it goes away. And then also, if you're not using a data management tool, anytime you save this assembly, you create a .1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's basically versionizing those parts and assembly files, and that's a really nice thing, but some customers don't like it. And one of the things I wanted to mention is you can actually now turn that off, so that it will just save over top of the existing file, just like any other software. Okay, so without going into any more detail on any of the other modules, I'm going to go into now some of the reference control and reference changes that have been made. So we'll start off with one here. We'll just go ahead and change one of these features and create kind of a problem for ourselves. And now, right mouse buttons in the interface. Anytime you're in extrude, sketch, you can get to the most commonly used commands by holding your right mouse button down. Any of the commands up here that you're going to use, I would say 90% of the commands up here are going to actually be in the right mouse button. So I'm going to go edit my sketch. I'm just going to remove that. It's going to complain that there's some other features referencing it. And I'm going to say yes. I'm just going to ignore that. And we'll bring up the palette and we'll grab one of our sketches, predefined sketches, and we'll place it there. I'll just scale it to a 1-to-1 scale. And I just need to change the size of this. So I'm going to change it to 1.35 diameter. Okay, so we'll say OK to that, and we'll say OK to that. And you'll see right away I'm getting I have an issue with the model where it's failing, and that was likely because of that message that I saw earlier where I was ripping out this part, and now this hole that was placed on some feature is missing. So let's go investigate that. And one of the things I like to point out is the reference viewer, because this is one of the most underutilized pieces of functionality in the software, and it's very good for investigating your problem. These guys, they're okay, but they bring up a web page and they give you some information, but reference viewer is going to be way more helpful in seeing the parent-child relationships between your features and parts. You'll see right at the top here, this is my active feature. It's because I right mouse clicked there and went to reference viewer. I can also activate the round, or I can activate any feature within the model tree or any part in the model tree by clicking here and then clicking that feature or part. Okay. Let's not talk about this just yet. I'm going to just kind of stay over here on the right-hand side. So you can see right in the middle is the hole, and I can expand that. I can see the references that was used to place it. Okay. And on the right, I can see the children of that. So you can see there's quite a few things attached to this hole. If I don't fix this hole, I'm going to have problems way further downstream with the entire model. So that's one of the things I need to work on because of the fact that there's so many children. You can see there's also a couple of parents here. We have this extrude as a parent, and then we also have this extrude 2 as a parent. Let's just expand that extrude 2. You can see this surface is one of the references for the hole, so they placed the primary reference there. And then you can see this missing reference. And this is what's new, is that when you click on the missing reference, it actually highlights that missing reference on the screen, even though it's no longer there, which is really nice because that tells me exactly what it is that's missing, and I can then replace that reference by doing what I'm about to do now, which is use the edit references command. Now this is a command that in Creo 2 and back, it's there. But most of the time, we just accidentally click it because we're going for edit definition. We see the interface, we close it, and we never use it again. And we kind of, say, okay, that's great. I'll use edit definition instead to replace my references. But now we've got a newer interface. I'm going to use this a few times here in this demo so that you can see. So we see the surface, again, as a reference. We see the axis that's missing. Now let's just replace that reference. I'm going to make sure my axes are on, and there's an axis for this cylinder here. I'm going to use that to replace. And you can see it's been changed, and we'll say OK. All right, and so we also have a round that's been kind of destroyed here because it's missing references. And one of the things I'll do with that is replace this reference here. Just back up a second. Yeah, because this reference here is so much different than the one before, we're probably going to have to go in and use intent chain instead to grab all those edges. And so I do want to touch on that. Intent edge, you see if I hover over one of these edges here, this is another way to reference edges. So if I right mouse click just one time, I get to what's called an intent edge. I can also get to it in my filters here, intent chain, and if I'm hovering over the edges, it's only going to highlight those. So what is an intent edge? Well, let's talk about that, because after I fix this rib, which I need to do next, and then we'll just replace the axis for the pattern itself. So this feature has a round on it now. It's got this fillet that's at the top. And now I can safely change this feature, underlying feature. I can change it to 6-sided, 5-sided feature. And because I've referenced this as an intent edge and tied it to the feature rather than to the edges, that round will stay intact and it will not fail. Okay, so that's one of the another tip I would give you is that if you're going to reference edges, like all of these edges here, don't go around selecting them individually. Use intent chain or intent edge instead, and it's a more robust way of referencing that edge. Another thing, just a word on patterns. We have this lead pattern here. One of the limitations was that, let's say I wanted to add a round here. One of the things is that I would have to know the lead pattern. Let's say I wanted to add it to this edge here, and I wanted to then reference that pattern. One of the limitations was that you had to select the lead or the seed feature within that pattern. No, you no longer have to do that. You can reference. Obviously the issue with that is that if I've got a much more complicated model tree here, I'd have to go find the pattern, then find a lead feature in the model tree, referencing it graphically, and then go grab it, which was a little more time consuming. But now I can reference any of these instances within the pattern, and then if I do a pattern of that, I can actually do a reference pattern to the rest of those features. It doesn't matter anymore that you select the seed or the very beginning feature within that pattern. Okay, so let's use the edit references dialog a couple more times just to show you a couple more scenarios here. I'm going to right mouse click and say edit references. Here's our edit references dialog box. I have this extrude here. This has been placed, this hole has been placed on this extrude and this axis, and I'm just going to replace those two with maybe this reference, and you can see it's being changed, and then that axis. We can preview it, and then we can accept it. Same thing with these holes here. I have an axis, front plane, and a surface. I really only just want to replace that axis in this case and move that hole. Let's do the same thing with this extrude. And I'll replace, let's say I want to re-reference it to the top surface instead of the bottom of that hole. And instead of to the side of the part here, let's just bring up a plane and we'll tie it to a plane instead. We'll keep that reference, and then for the edge, you'll see here, this is actually a common issue where I see where the edge of or the silhouette edge of a round or chamfer is, or a chamfer is referenced instead of the side of the part. And maybe the intent was to select the side of the part to reference and place this feature, but now we have this situation, and if we change the size of the round, this guy is going to float around on it. So let's replace that reference and get rid of the round reference there. Reference the side of the part. Yes, it did grow in size, and it actually drifted that over a little bit, but at least we have more stable references within our model now. And now we can change this back to the original size if we need to. Here's another situation. We're going to use what's called a replace reference command here. So let me just resume the rest of you'll see there's some features that are suppressed here. I'm going to go under operations and resume all of those features at once. Okay. And you'll see I have a rib and a sweep that are referencing sketch A. This is sketch A, which is this diagonal line here. And I'm just going to re-reference it to this. Now I can go into each feature here and right mouse click and edit the references of those features individually. But what I'd really like to do is replace the sketch for both of these features. And this is what I was referring to earlier. What I'd like to do is right mouse click here and say, well, let's replace the references of the features that are attached to sketch A. And we're going to attach those to sketch B, which is this curved geometry instead. So the new reference is sketch B. The child features that will be affected will be the rib and the sweep. And we can preview it, and then we can accept it. Okay, so that's two commands that have shown you. Edit references, replace references. Those are two very useful commands to be able to use. Then also intent edge referencing. That's not really a new thing. That's been around for quite some time. Being able to view the missing references in the reference viewer is another nice one. The other thing too that I would say is not new but is very useful to know is if you're editing a sketch and let's say you go to delete one of the edges of the sketch and it comes back and says this entity is referenced by other features. Well, of course it is. It's the base feature at the very top of the model tree. And so I've got these protrusions, holes, rounds, all these features could be potentially interfacing with that and reference to it. So if I want to change my sketch, the thing you want to do is you want to add the geometry that you want to replace it with first. So I'll bring in an arc, for instance. Something like this. And what we're going to do is we're going to basically right mouse click the geometry we want to get rid of, and we're going to replace that geometry here. We're going to replace it with the newly created geometry, and it's just basically saying that it's not going to be able to create the same dimensions for us. That's okay, I'm fine with that. It's a different dimensioning scheme, different geometry. And now we're going to say okay and okay. And so now you see the rounds and other dependent geometry are happy. They're not going to fail because I kind of planned ahead and did it that way. Okay. Now let's get to this this assembly here, because what I'd like to show you now is some interesting ways of editing geometry and basically breaking your references as you go. Let's take, for instance, let me just open this part here. I'm going to delete this extrude that you see. I'm going to create that a different way. So this is actually a common thing to do where we do match drilling of holes. We got this post going through this sheet metal part, and we want a hole in that exact location. So we're going to activate, and actually before I even go down that road, let me just show you kind of where you're going to be able to access some of the settings here. We're going to go under File Options, and you're going to see a couple of new sections here in Creo 3. One is the Notification Center. This is where you can see, you can actually turn off and on the notifications that you're going to see. You can see one notification here. It says one outdated component feature notification in and below node. So we can actually expand that, find this external copy geom is out of date. There's a good chance that, there's just the reference geometry is in session. So we could look deeper into that. But this will allow us to turn off and on those notifications if we're not concerned with those. The other is the update control. This is the one that I want to mention to you, and this is the one that's kind of huge in my opinion. Now, let's skip over the layout stuff. If you're not using layout, which is a paid-for add-on type of functionality, really what you want to focus on is the copy geom features update. So if you're using AAX with copy geoms, this is what you would want to do. Let's set that to update manually. And also the copied placement references update, we'll set that to manual. Copied feature references. This is the one where, like, if I use and create this hole, and let's say I wanted to decide when that will be updated, I could set it to manual. Let's say ultimately I'd like to set this up so that it would break that dependency automatically for me. I could set this to no dependency. So that is a big one in my opinion. Let me actually go, and I'm going to set this to manual first, because I'm going to, at first I do want this to update, and I want to have those two pieces of geometry tied to each other. And let me just go back to assembly, because this is another area that's had some settings added to it. So you got your notification center, your update control, and then under assembly mode, you can set this up so that your external components permitted for reference are set to none. So what this is going to do is it's going to, with this setting coupled with these two settings here where we can have placement and feature references aren't permitted, right? But we can actually allow an exception to that. So essentially what this is going to do for us is it's going to let us reference parts, but not without a warning. Okay, it's going to come back and say, hey, look, you're basically illegally referencing some external geometry. You can say, cancel, or you can go ahead and reference geometry. At least you know that you're doing some sort of external reference, okay? And that's really the main point. So you set this up, you set up the update control here to either be manual or no dependency, and that will then allow you to monitor those dependencies between your parts a little better. Now, here's the typical approach: is we activate that component, and then we want to then reference some geometry in here outside into this part. So we're going to create an extrude on this surface. So far, so good. We don't have any external references yet. We're going to use the project command, which is the command that I would say creates these references the most often. We're going to just pick on a couple of references here. You see right away, reference restricted by environment scope was selected. Confirm reference anyway. And what this is going to do is it's going to back up that geometry. It's going to add a sort of a reference feature to the sheet metal part. And we'll do it again, and we'll confirm. Okay, and we'll say OK. And it's going to be a cut, so we'll flip the direction. It's going to cut it through the geometry. Let's go through all, and we'll say OK. All right. Okay, so now let's take a look at this part here. I'm just going to open it by itself. Actually, let me activate the top-level assembly using my Control A. We'll say open. Let's go take a look at this extrude 7 here. You see the geometry backup has been added, so it's kind of adding a copy geom for you in a way here. It's adding the geometry to the model and letting you go ahead and reference that geometry. Let's go ahead and delete this constraint. I want to move this a little bit to the back. Okay, and then we'll regenerate. And that's okay. Just kind of moving the geometry. That's all I'm really wanting to do here to show you the notification here. If I hover over this one outdated component feature notification and note below node, and we'll expand that, and we see this is the feature, this is the sketch, and this is the geometry backup. Let's right mouse click that, and we'll go into update control. You can see it's set to manual update with notification. So let's go take a look at the differences. And we see right away the new location, the old location. Let's just highlight that old location a little better so we can see it. The old location there. So this is the manual update with notification. No update has happened yet to that geometry until we say either update. Here's another thing we can do. We can actually isolate it so that we can actually see a little better what's going on there. Okay, so let's turn that back off. Let's go ahead and let it update. We'll go ahead and update that geometry. And let's see if we can get that guy to update. And it looks like it's going to fail on me, I guess. Probably not a good change to make there. Let's go try something else. We'll try putting a cut on this part here. Okay, and what I'll do is I'll just cut away some geometry here, and we'll use this plane. Now my external reference is going to be for the depth. Okay, so we'll say OK, and we'll cut away material instead of adding it. And for the depth handle, I'm going to right mouse click, I'm going to say to selected, and I'm going to select the side of this sheet metal part here. It's externally referencing, so that's another way you can external reference, which is a good thing to know because a lot of people don't know that. Okay, and now let's take and we'll activate this part and we'll widen it a bit. We'll say 110. And we'll do a Control G to regenerate. Okay. So let's go take a look at the change. So let's activate our top level assembly. We'll go to our armrest, which is the one we added the cut to. We see that extrude is updated. Right mouse click, update control. Let's go take a look at the differences. We see that the wall has been moved. You can isolate it and then let that cut update. And so now it's in line with the wall that I referenced earlier. Okay, so that's just illustrating the point that I was trying to make. This geometry back here didn't for some reason. Probably just a failure based on the type of edit that I made to the little handle there. Okay, so that said, what if and one of the things is like right now these two parts are tied to each other, okay? So one of the things I can do here under this armrest, this backup geometry, is I could set it to no dependency. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to set it to no dependency. Right away you see the dependency to the reference model will be broken and the feature will not be updated relative to it. Please confirm. We'll say OK. So now let's just go ahead and right mouse click this feature. I want to show you something under the reference viewer. If I select on dependency here, if this had an external reference to that parent, and let me just see if I can go back one on this. So you can see under the reference viewer, under dependency, you see there's a dependency here to the assembly, right? And to the extrude of our bottom pan sheet metal part. And that is an external reference that will update the geometry, but it will also cause you issues later. One of the things you can do here is you can actually break the reference with this little trash can icon that you see here. You can either break it here in the reference viewer, or you can do it like I did earlier under the update control. You can say no dependency and then break that reference. And then let's go back into the reference viewer again, and you'll see there's no dependency to the assembly or to the sheet metal part that we referenced earlier. But at the same time, you're also making it so that these two do not update. So if I change the width of this, this doesn't update. So you just have to know that that's the case. One other thing you can do with this backup geometry here, you see there's a reference to it there. What I can do is I can actually make that a standalone feature, and it's just telling me that it's irreversible if I do this. It's just going to create a copy geom in this part that is no longer linked up to the external part that it was. So that's the other thing, is that under these copy geoms, let's go change some other feature within this assembly. So let's say the style feature right here. I'm going to edit the definition of it. And let's just let's go open it by itself since it doesn't let me change it from there. And we'll just pull this geometry out a bit and maybe forward a bit. Okay. And then we'll go back to our model and regenerate. Okay, so you can see that that back geometry updated with the change, but that's because we have an external copy geom linked up to our our skeleton. At any point, I can set that to be not automatic, to manual, so that I'll get either a manual with a notification, and I can choose whether or not it updates, or I can break the dependency. So even with copy geoms, I can break the dependency. Now, one of the things I want to say about that is if you go and you edit definition, one of the commands that's kind of always been there in copy geoms has been this no dependency. But it was more just don't bring updates through to the copy geom, more of a command. It didn't actually break the reference completely and cleanly. So this no dependency here will actually break that reference again. So we can set the update notification here, or we can right mouse click it. More convenient to do it here under update control. So we'll say we'll basically break that dependency to a copy geom. You see there's no more update control in here. So then if we go back to our skeleton, and we update this style feature again. Let's just reverse those changes. Let's regenerate. And now you can see the style feature that I changed in the skeleton is much smaller on the sides here. It didn't update the parent geometry or the child geometry. So I've now broken that reference to the model. Okay. So if you currently have Creo 3.0 and you're working at the assembly level making your references, I suggest you try using these settings here. Set it to none, allow some exceptions, reference to non-permitted components are the exceptions, and what it's going to do is replace those references and back those references up. Set up your update control here to not be update manually. If you want always to break the reference every time you reference some geometry, just set that to no dependency, and you can reference externally from one part to the other all day long, and you're not going to be creating external references. You're borrowing the geometry in that case, and but you know there is no link anymore to those features. Okay. So that's pretty much the gist of it. You have those types of commands there at your. The only other thing I would say there is under the update. Let's just go find the command. This update with manual update with notification, this isn't an option unless you have DEX. This is the one where I went in and viewed the changes before I updated them. So that'd be one thing you'd be missing out on if you didn't have DEX. But you know, Advanced Assembly Extension gives you pretty much the rest of what I was showing you earlier. Okay. Let's bounce back over here to the presentation PowerPoint. We'd like to point out some of our success stories, some of our customers, directly customers, and here's one. GoPro is industry leader in the action camera industry, and they have been using Creo for quite some time now. We started them off in the very beginning with Creo, and they're going pretty good now. So if you guys have any other questions for me, I'll open it up for questions now. Otherwise, you can contact us at any of these sources, nextrev.com, 408-986-0200, and then you can also email us directly at tech for tech questions and sales for sales questions. Okay? If you think of anything after the presentation you got questions on, contact us at those locations. And don't forget about nextrev.com/training if you are interested in any of our training. So at this point, I'm just going to open it up for any questions if you may have any. You can reach me at jasonb@nextrev.com if you think of anything after this presentation. Otherwise, everyone have a good weekend, and we'll see you again next week.